Hello, welcome back everyone to another episode of Peter Ingle and myself, Mihai Algiu, going in depth about some ideas that and practices that change our life, connected with the fourth way teaching. And this is part of a longer several episodes. This will be episode 9, and you can find here previous episodes. They're all connected. Also, you'll find here a link to my website, where you see what I'm doing with these ideas, as well as Peter's website, where he has several highly recommended books focused on fourth way, as well as non-dual ideas and how they interact with each other for our own awakening. So, and also we are planning to start in January an actual several week fourth way focused module. So stay tuned, and if you're interested in this kind of talks and this kind of ideas, let us know. I will let you know when we do this. So Peter, we've been talking last few episodes on this what they call in fourth way 6 obstacles to awakening, 6 obstacles to consciousness, and them being just the what happens, those manifestations like daydreaming, this uncontrolled, unnecessary mind activity that we call in the fourth way imagination, identification, inner considering, lying, unnecessary talk, and the expression of negative emotions. These are the so-called six obstacles to awakening, and they are manifestations of the second state. These are what's happening when our consciousness is dormant, and when we are, although we think and feel as if we are asleep, like because we can see colors and hear music and become aware that we are hungry, so we may have the idea that we are awake, but from the point of view of what's possible in terms of consciousness potential, this waking sleep that waking state that we spend our life is more like akin to a kind of sleep torpor, hypnotic sleep, as compared to what's possible if we apply this and if we are committed and interested in these ideas. So yeah, so that's what happens when consciousness is asleep. Then there is chaos, there is misery, there are illusions, there is stress, there is dissatisfaction, sense of lack, and unfulfillment, So in the fourth way, the idea was to early on learn some self-observation and some self-remembering, and then tackle these manifestations of sleep. So even if we are kind of half asleep, we have to start there. And so we are just trying to jumpstart ability to witness, observe, and bring this towards this, they call it the wall of mechanicality, these unconscious behaviors. And by the very fact of observing them and struggling with them in a certain way, that will have us become more aware, more awake, and at the same time, those manifestations of sleep will gradually diminish. This is not a special pill that we are going to take or do a few practices for a few days or a few months. It's going to make it all good. So this is a ongoing, lifelong work. And we want to talk today about this obstacle called inner considering. Inner considering, as you realize by now, fourth way likes to use certain terms. certain precise terms. Why? So we really know what we are talking about. Yeah, so we have to define these terms. Yeah. So inner considering. So maybe I'll pass it to you, Peter. Take us a little bit of the description or definition of inner considering and some ways in which it shows up.
Just as you were
wanted to say based on what I said, maybe you took some notes or something.
I did actually was making a note to remind myself to say something later, but just what you said, the name inner considering, that's the sort of nickname we use in the fourth way. The actual word is internal considering, as opposed to something we'll talk about later, which is external considering. And the idea is simply that what we're talking about is all internal. It's completely internal. And so to shorten it, to sweeten it a little bit, we call it inner considering. But it's basically identification. And by the way, all these obstacles are really the result of identification and imagination. And it's the result of consciousness being identified, lapsing into imagination. And then we manifest according to what happens to our psychology and our sense of I when we're identified. And of course, the thing we're most prominently identified with is our feeling of I. But internal considering is identification with other people, mainly in the form of, are other people considering me enough? Do I imagine they're giving me enough of my due, respecting me? Or quite simply, do they like me? Do they approve of me? We don't say this to ourselves, but we feel it emotionally. And this is the other thing interesting about inner considering. It's an emotional phenomenon. It's also instinctive. Like if you walk into a room full of strange people and they all turn and look at you, or if you go onto a stage and everybody turns and looks at you suddenly, instinctively you are exposed. Your body is suddenly seen by all these people. There's a visceral reaction in the body. Even professionals encounter this. They know before they go on stage, there's going to be a moment there, a kind of an unpleasant, perhaps, moment of shock. Some people like that energy. Wow, I can't wait to walk onto the stage and I'll get that boost. But some actors are well-known performers for even getting sick, physically sick, right before they go on stage, every time, because their body doesn't want to be seen. That's the instinctive side. Then there's the emotional side, which is more me, my idea of myself. How am I seen? Will they like me? Will they approve of me? Will they validate me? Will they confirm me? Or will they be judging me? So that's all internal considering. And the other side of that is when we think, am I giving other people their due? Am I considering them enough? Am I a good enough person? Am I showing them that they are valid? And a simple example is when someone else is talking and somebody else will be talking and we'll be going, we feel as though we need to be sending a signal back, letting them know we understand them and that we approve of what they say and that we validate them or agree with them. So there are many nuances. This is another idea that has a lot of volume in the fourth way, a lot of depth and breadth and height, this internal considering related to our imaginary idea of ourselves. And before I toss it back to you, Mihai, I wanted to add that the fourth way is a little unique in talking about this. You don't see this idea of inner considering talked about so specifically in other systems. People talk about fear, stage fright, embarrassment, in the normal use of the term self-consciousness. Oh, I'm so self-conscious when the teacher asked me to stand up and present my paper or something like that, or to express my point of view. I'm too embarrassed. I'm too shy. Shy is another word that falls into this category. And so we'll be talking about a lot of things, but it's interesting to note you don't encounter this type of surgery around this form of identification that we have with other people outside of the fourth way. It's a very practical, real, valuable way or thing to observe in ourselves and understand what it has to do with being more conscious. Our goal is not to stop inner considering. Our goal is not to be able to walk onto a stage and not feel nervousness or instinctive fright or the feeling of exposure. No, we're not trying to, that's not the purpose. The purpose is to see what an identification means in relative to consciousness or to awareness. And then to see in particular, why is it and how is it that we are so identified with other people and their impression of us and the impression we imagine we're making on them? Why is this so important? And how can we see it more clearly?
Wow. Yeah, as we were talking, and actually you mentioned that thing with the nodding. Somehow we've been conditioned in some way societally, so we nod. And then you mentioned that, and somehow it's interesting if I were to stop nodding as a fourth way exercise. Could be, one can do a fourth way
Yes,
exercise
we've had this exercise, you and I, before.
Yeah, to stop nodding.
It's very awkward feeling at first.
Both for the one, say, if I stop nodding, that actually I think that will bring a lot of reminders towards catching how the body is doing this thing that was conditioned to do for so long, and so we'll definitely act as a strong, frequent reminder, like putting a big spoke in the wheel of mechanicality of how I should be. Yeah, but I think it will also, if you were to stop nodding, then I think in the list, in me, it would be like, oh, does he get me? Does he not like me? Does he disapprove? It's interesting. So these are social cues to
reinforce our imaginary idea of each other. These are social cues that keep the ego going in us. Because here's how I'm experiencing it even right now, Mihai. And I know we're looking at each other on the screen, but let's assume for the moment we're in person because it's the same. You say something, and I infer from what you say that you want a reaction from me. You may not actually be doing that, but that's what I infer. I'm inner considering. So I infer that you want a reaction from me. And it's all right here. I feel it right here in my face. It's right here. It's going on right here. This, oh, okay. Okay, yeah, Whereas when I'm more, I am more present, when there is more consciousness, aware here, it's as though it's back somewhere behind there watching all of this. And so it becomes obvious that the discomfort is here because it's my idea of myself that's in jeopardy now. I want Mihai to like me. I want him to know that oh yes, Mihai, that's good what you said. All of these things. It's right here, sort of in the middle ground. Mihai's in the foreground. Peter's in the middle ground, inner considering, and then consciousness is in the background. But what happens is when consciousness identifies, it comes into the middle ground. It starts occupying all the inner ground. It's identified with Peter and his idea of himself. And then it goes even further and it goes into the foreground. And now it's Mihai and me and my reaction. It all becomes one emotional thing. And this is the ego. This is imaginary feeling of self, of I, versus consciousness. Now, I have been with people who tried as an exercise not to nod, and they turned into stones. They turned into trees who never blinked or moved or anything, because it was an idea that was taken to the extreme by the ego. Because we can identify with trying not to be identified. We can actually inner consider about inner considering to the point that we're inner considering about being seen, that we're inner considering when we are trying not to inner consider. It's a little complicated there what I said, but it's this is why it's so fascinating. It's so tricky, so subtle. What is consciousness? What is I? What is this identification? Why are we so concerned about other people? So yes, this is a rich topic.
Yeah.
And by the way, basically no one is immune from inner considering. Even those who appear to be on top of their game all the time, they might appear to be free from or not affected by what we're talking about. And it's not the case, because if you could just peel away the thin layer of most people's presentation of themselves, this is one of the first things you'd discover, is that in their psyche, in their ego, in their imaginary sense of themselves, they are uncomfortable, concerned, anxious, fearful, something about how they're being perceived.
Yeah. Yeah, and I totally confirm this working with people in clinical setting, is that there is this aspect of false personality, ego, that is seemingly in control, that is seemingly having it together. You know, we learn to adapt and to mask and to function. Yeah, but you know, I guess I'm lucky and I'm grateful that I interact with people all day, every day, beyond that falls off and crumples. And then there's another aspect of the false personality, or so let's say the wounded essence in some way, where all of these are very apparent. No matter how powerful, strong, confident that person is, there's underneath, just a little bit under that mask, there is this, I want them to like me. I have to be liked. I need approval. What would they think of me? I'm afraid. So, you know, and I wouldn't, I wouldn't worry so much about nodding. I mean, that may be a good exercise a little bit. There's a much bigger inner considering fish to fry. And just for the sake of clarity, and anything to do with this, some emotional, energetic, personal response of wanting that other people see me in a good light. Wanting and other people, they see me as good, can take different forms. They wanted to see me as respectable, or as wealthy, or as spiritual, depending on the flavor of the false personality we have. You know, we can have a spiritual false personality where their spiritual ego wants to be recognized as being special and developed. So yeah, wanting to be recognized, wanting to get approval, wanting to be liked, wanting to be seen as good, and doing something about it, not just wanting it. Trying to assess of how do I need to be so that this person is going to see me like that. So then I stop some innate natural tendency. I hold it back because then they will disapprove of that. So I'm giving them some other thing, which is not how I really feel. You see, this is a whole like cocktail of lies, inauthenticity,
and wrong work of centers.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. When we become identified, all the centers, it affects all the centers, the 4 centers, and they interfere now. And now you've got emotional energy is seeping into the intellectual center, and it's trying to figure all this out. The intellect can't really ever figure out what's going on in the emotional center. And then you've got instinctive energy in here too, especially if you're in public or just in a group. Some people, you know, as soon as there's more than 3 or 4 people in the room, they start to change their behavior and grow uncomfortable. And that can mean one person starts to grow more quiet, the more people there are in the room. Another person, inner considering in a different fashion, starts to grow louder, take up more space, be more prominent. So this is another thing. It varies in form. And that's why it's important to understand it. What's behind the behavior? What's behind the decisions about all this that we make in ourselves? If you take away this word inner considering, for example, and I mentioned earlier, not many other teachings that I'm aware of anyway, speak about it so specifically as the 4th way. If you take away this term inner considering, what's left? What is it? what are we really talking about in our emotional center and in our instinctive center and relative to consciousness or awareness? And this is really the most important thing of all, to know this. Forget about the words, forget about what it's called, forget about the definitions. Behind it, what is going on in ourselves? And this is a rich study, as we've been saying.
You notice you say this to me, it comes out of my mouth. It's not a fourth way term, but it's more like a clinical term, because I have seen in myself and others that what's underneath, it's a particular type of fear that I call frozen fear. I mean, it's from some other teacher, frozen fear, in a way that there's fear that I'm not aware of, and it drives all this dance. There's a fear that is deeply subconscious, however, that has power over the whole operations. So this fear of being seen, fear of being rejected, fear of being abandoned, fear of being scolded at, fear of feeling something.
Also, fear of being honest and true, and being aligning ourselves with the truth in the moment. It's odd. We are afraid. We are afraid to be true to ourselves often. We're afraid to speak the truth in a situation. It's considered politically incorrect or socially unacceptable, and we don't even, because we're unfamiliar with it, we don't know how to do it in the right way. Sometimes someone will blurt out the truth in a situation, and it's done so, I don't want to say undiplomatically, but without discrimination, without taste, without understanding and empathy and compassion, and really knowing why is it necessary to speak the truth when we're with other people or in a situation. Sometimes actually it's not appropriate. This is another subject, but we are, as Mihai is saying, we're afraid. What is the fear? What are we afraid of? And what are we afraid of in other people in this regard? And what are we afraid of in ourselves? Because remember, it's internal. It's all internal. It's what we're imagining about other people. And it's what we're imagining about how they see us and how we imagine ourselves in an attempt to project an idea of ourselves, which is not true. It's not the truth of who we are.
Yeah, that's interesting, the case you described, with that kind of truth coming out, like in a really, like, let's say, hurtful or undiplomatic way. That usually happens because the truth has been held back many times. So it comes as a volcanic kind of.
Yes, it comes out as negative. Oddly enough, often it will come out with negative force, negative energy, destructive energy, instead of coming out as the truth. Usually when the truth is stated, it opens up something. This is why one person in a room of 200 people who are getting all identified can speak the truth, and the room will grow quiet. Now, unfortunately, the reverse can happen too. One person can incite a crowd with negative declarations and negative energy and so forth.
I often use this parameter to investigate certain unconscious or manifestations that could be useful for this internal considering. Like, I'm often using this with people and myself. Okay, what's the seeming advantage or utility of this way of being, and what's the cost? So to me, it seems like the subconscious utility, the payoff. Remember, David Hawkins would say that before you can let go of an ego manifestation, you first need to find out what is the juice behind it, what is the payoff you are getting. And then you need to be able to see that, feel that, and let go of that payoff of the juice before you can let go of the manifestation. So the seeming utility, because it's not really a utility. Seeming advantage of showing up like this is to attempt to get liked, to be approved, in order to feel safe, emotionally safe, to boost the sense of I'm okay, to avoid feeling that feeling of, I don't know, imagining we are disliked or judged or rejected. Here's the cost I see. It's like complete, like it's stressful. It is stressful. It is highly inauthentic. It is a bondage. Like I'm kind of not allowing the my essence tendencies as in my inner compass to guide me, and I am chameleonizing myself according to this imaginary programs. So it's really in a stronger cases it becomes clinical. I mean, I can see what is called anxiety disorder, or social anxiety, or avoidant personality disorder, or all kind of stuff, is that inner considering is so strong, emotionally and physically, instinctively, as Peter said, as well as mentally. So then it's like impeding life functioning. So when it is so strong that it's impeding life functioning, we can't hide it anymore. We can't function. Then it's a disorder. But as Peter said, we all have it.
And that's why it's important too to understand the goal, especially in the very beginning, maybe even for a long time, is not to get rid of this, to not remove this, to not consider, gosh, I'm terrible. I interconsider so much. I should stop interconsidering. What do I need to do? Tell me what I can do, please, to not interconsider so much. It's not about that, because as Mihai is saying, there's something else behind all of this. And it's the result of some kind of identification with ourselves. And what's also interesting is I think everyone has this experience. Periodically, we find ourselves in a situation where normally we would interconsider, and for some reason we don't. We're that day or that moment, we're a little less identified. And this is very, but then it's almost like we go, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be interconsidering. And so we fall back into it. It's almost like a teddy bear that we can hold on to for comfort. It's the comfort of the ego, comfort, a sense of I, a sense of security in identity. And this is another way to say perhaps what internal considering is. It's a resource we turn to for security in identity. When we interconsider, we have to pay, as Mihai is saying, we suffer when we interconsider. And who suffers? I suffers. And when we give it up, not give it up, but well, you could call it that. Let's call it that. It's just a word we'll say. When you give it up, I also suffers. This is interesting, because then it doesn't have its comfort anymore. It doesn't have its security anymore. And this is why sometimes something we used to do would be to put myself in a situation where I knew I would interconsider. Just a mild situation. Maybe actually stand up in the class, let's say, and give a short statement, or state my opinion, or my observation, or my viewpoint, knowing we used to have meetings, in fact, and some people would be quite nervous to stand up in the group of, say, 200 people and offer an observation or share an insight. Some people would stand up, raise their hand, get called upon, and just stand up and stand there for 10 seconds and then sit back down without saying anything. And it was an attempt to just simply watch the flush of energy and emotion that would happen. Suddenly now, here I am in the middle of the room, gonna be heard, be seen and be heard. So this is also can be useful. Do little things inconspicuously, just to see what happens inside me when I'm in this situation. And sometimes, as I mentioned before, that at the beginning of this statement, that sometimes we're not interconsidering. And to notice that too, and to see what the difference is, and to see what it feels like. This is the key, I think, to see what it feels like when you're not identified. What is different when you're not identified? And how do you feel in terms of your consciousness, your awareness, a sort of clean clarity of just being? And nothing else, nothing can touch you. It's okay to say the truth. It's okay not to say it's okay to be. Nothing touches you because you're not touching it. You're not attached to it. You're not identified with other people and so on. Yes, this is a rich
Yeah.
topic, a rich arena for exploration.